I can't believe how many hours and sleepless hours at night I've spent thinking about how to deal with this video about the issue of Confederate monuments and whether or not they should be allowed to exist. And so I'm going to start with a very famous economist that almost none of you have heard of, but was the major economic mind of the 20th century, probably saved democracy during the Depression, and certainly mobilized the war effort, and as a young man was the person who spotted that the rigorous terms of the Treaty of Versailles were such that within 20 years we'd have war with someone like Hitler. Well, his name is John Maynard Keynes, and what I want to say about him is I want to quote this. He said, "When the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir?" And 2 or 3 weeks ago, before I watched this video in my religious studies class, I had a particular position on the Confederate Civil War monument issue, which was, I guess, similar to my position on gun control. Let the ignorant bastards have them, and if it makes them happy, maybe we can figure another way to win an election. But then in my class, I saw we had a very balanced account of the issues that were involved in these removal of the Civil War monuments and the Charlotte riot and the death involved and such. And at that point, something clicked in, and I thought, the Civil War is a blood-soaked lie. Historical research will tell you the latest figures from demographics are, out of a population of 31 million total Americans, North and South, 750,000 total died in combat. Well, most of them would have been young men, and these young men were somebody's lover or son or daughter or whatever you might be. Someone was left. I know about this being left with someone killed in war. Several of my best friends were killed in Vietnam, and when they're gone forever, but you never stop thinking about them. I started to think about a certain almost pernicious attraction to these Civil War monuments. There's kind of an aesthetic about it. There's kind of a hilarious break of it too. When you see Robert E. Lee being hauled off with all of his ceremonial impressiveness by a crane, it's almost relief. It's almost gives you a feeling of relief. Maybe for some of us who know what slavery was really like, and I'm going to go talking more about that because I've been doing some follow-up research on that we felt maybe like they felt in the Soviet Union when communism fell and all of the lies were sort of exposed and the statues of Lenin went down to be melted down. I think some of us would feel that way about these Civil War generals, because the fact remains that they fought for what was a horrible institution. I've spent the day working, just dealing with day-to-day accounts of slavery, its effects on families. One thing that's created quite a stir is male rape was a way of humiliating and degrading potentially powerful black men in front of their families. I didn't know this, nor did I know that by the end of the Civil War, 10% of the Union Army was black, and that was 140,000, and maybe like 30,000 of the members of the Union Navy. And of that group, 40,000 were killed. And if you were a black in the Union Army and you were captured, they took no prisoners. So these blacks fought on, facing death for their freedom. Now, as far as memorials went, I was surprised to find that there's a long list of memorials recognizing the contribution that the black soldiers made to winning the Civil War. When I was a young man, so long ago, I had an American history course from a guy named Leon Litwack, who later won the Pulitzer Prize in History. And he was the first one to really look at the seriousness of the role and the scope of the contributions that the black soldiers made to ending the Civil War, which was a stalemate almost through 1864. He was able to gain some oral history accounts that were done in the Depression, where these soldiers said, well, you know, we took Richmond and those white guys got to march in the parade. And what I'm thinking about now is I still resist the idea of mythologizing and memorializing something as horrible as the Civil War. But in a sense, the statues, being as they are a target. And they cause me to do the research that I'm doing now. The question is often brought up about, even in the Gettysburg Address, that somehow those northern and southern dead made the ground sacred. They made it holy. But to me, it seems like that's sort of like sanctifying a stupid mistake. There's something in history called Pickett's Charge. Reenactors love it. Everybody loves it. And basically what happened at the Battle of Gettysburg is Robert E. Lee sent 12,000 soldiers up this incline into artillery fire, and half of them were killed for no reason. It was a total no-win situation, and nobody ever learned. So if there were some way of saying, well, these poor bastards lost their lives for this stupid, and I'm not going to use the word cause, then that might be a way of countervailing the memorial. And I think that there was a very famous American filmmaker named Frank Capra. He made what they called Why We Fight movies during the Second World War. Your grandfathers, I guess even great-grandfathers now, probably saw them. And what he did was he exposed the Nazis to the stupid pomposity that they really were, and just presented Americans as, you know, the guy that goes to do this thing that he did and then comes home. Now, what's going to happen out of this? I might even talk about this at the next video, because my assistant, Serena, put all of my stories on a flash drive. I have a time travel story about a guy that ends up, after a nuclear war, time traveling to a point in time of the Confederate prisoner of war camp in Camp Randall, Madison. It was a horrible place. 20% of the people there died. And in my research on it, I found out that the Union soldiers, who were also stationed in Camp Randall, were treated like prisoners of war also. So what's coming out of this is, I haven't really gone further with tearing down the monuments, but I can tell you that in the next video or two, you'll hear me read some of the story. And the way it starts out is pretty shocking. And so that's what's come out of it to me. And does that mean I've changed my mind again? I thought I would talk about postmodernism and the process of mythic construction, but I don't want to put you all to sleep. And so instead, I'm going to talk about soldiers. And if there's any way of just remembering soldiers or pilots or whatever, and these little human things that I found in my travels. In Pickering, England, there's a churchyard cemetery, and they had what they called the chums groups there. When in World War I, a bunch of friends would form a group and they'd enlist in the army and they'd die in battle. And one of the inscriptions says, "I gave up my today so you could have a tomorrow." And you think about that guy and think about what he gave up, or woman, whoever it might be. And then I thought of another thing I just discovered, and that is the Battle of Britain is an event that's sort of in all of our historical consciousness, and we know about London being bombed and some of the horrific aspects of the bombing. I'm not going to talk about Allied bombing at this time. Rather, I'm going to say that there are several cemeteries in Germany where German airmen are buried and memorialized, and their families can come and visit the grave sites. And that's surprising. I heard another Battle of Britain story. A friend of mine's father, Richard West, was in the 8th Air Force, and that was one of the worst duties you could have. Some of you might have seen the movie Memphis Belle, and the idea was that if you survived 25 missions, that you got to go home, except nobody ever did. And Joseph Heller's Catch-22 takes that same point of view. But one of the things my friends told me, and now when I talked to him, he was probably way into his 70s, is on these horrible bombing raids they would go over Germany, where a significant proportion of them would be killed. They would fill space with their B-17, which was not pressurized, with beer, because Americans like their beer cold, and they served warm beer in Britain. And so these planes would come back, all shot to hell, people killed. And someone would say, "Yeah, but the beer's all right, we saved the beer." And he told that story like he was about 17 years old. And I have a Civil War time travel story. I hope I haven't mentioned it before. But in any case, I think that I am inspired to have at least something to read, I guess I did mention it, but from the first scene. I'm going to find that first scene and I'm going to read it next time. And the Confederate cemetery was still present in Resurrection Cemetery in Madison. And it was maintained by this little old lady from the end of the Civil War until the early 1900s. And now I'm told that somehow all the markers from it have disappeared out of political correctness. And I feel sad for that.